Okay, so first of all, welcome mothers and others. Today we're interviewing Lee Merritt, and he is running for Texas Attorney General. Lee is a constitutional lawyer and who has advocated for Texas families throughout his whole career. So we have a lot of questions for him today, so we're going to go right ahead and get started. Okay, so Lee, go right ahead and just talk to us about your decision for running for Attorney General and why are you doing this?
I made a decision to run for Attorney General while representing families from Texas. And so, as a part of my work as a constitutional attorney, I have to deal with governmental entities, Paxton being sort of at the top of the chain in terms of enforcing citizen rights in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been repeatedly denied rights, as you know, as we've all experienced from our Attorney General's office. Instead of being a people empowerment department, it seems to be the opposite. We're attacking schools, we're attacking women, and we don't allow the transparency mandated by the federal government. That was my dealings with Mr. Paxton's office for the most part. And then I got a chance to represent families all over the country and work with attorney generals, Republican and Democrat, from working with Keith Ellison in Minnesota when representing the family of George Floyd, or Ahmaud Arbery's family down in South Georgia. I would work with the attorney general there, Chris Carr. And I saw attorney generals getting it right, coming in and doing justice, protecting people, setting partisanism aside, and actually protecting the community. And after I was inspired by those AGs that I worked with, and even some of the ones who were getting it wrong, to see how powerful and influential that office could be. And I thought we deserved a good attorney general who will fight for everyone in Texas.
Yeah, that'd be great. We need that right now.
He's fighting for someone. He has one client, it seems to be Donald Trump.
Yeah, either that or everybody in Texas, because I've never had, I've been living in Texas my whole life. I was born in Texas. I'm from New Mexico though, but I'm so close to El Paso that I feel like, my parents lived here, lived here forever. So
sure.
Things that I've never seen is, for example, until recently, until Ken Paxton, is how many times does he sue other Texans?
Right.
Like, this is crazy pants. And this is not normal behavior.
The moniker for that office is literally the people's lawyer, meaning this is the man in the office that's supposed to represent all Texans.
Yeah.
And more often than not, we find other Texans, women, children, municipalities on the receiving end of the prosecution power of that office. And it's ridiculous. He's supposed to be defending the people.
Yeah, so we're paying him to sue us.
That's right.
It's just ridiculous.
That's exactly it. $1.26 billion budget in that office, by the way. So much good can be done. That office has the tentacles to actually fix the power grid or bring in folks who could, hold folks accountable when it fails. It has the tentacles to protect our schools. Our schools are being politicized right now. Yeah. We'll probably talk more about that. But it has the capacity to do so much good, and it's doing everything but.
Yeah, exactly. So so tell me, what are your top priorities?
Well, because there's a unique assault on voter rights in Texas that's gained national attention, we're putting that right up there on our priorities. Obviously, in order to gain the power of that office so we can advocate for people, we have to get elected. And Republicans have gone out of their way to disenfranchise, the growth that took place in Texas, those 4 million new Texas voters who have been redistricted out of influence in a way that the federal government has recently challenged. I've read that suit, I've reviewed it, I'm in support of it. I think it may be successful, but certainly protecting the right to vote, protecting women's rights is going to be a key issue here in Texas. Again, there's a unique assault on women's rights to vote that is contrary to Roe v. Wade. We have a responsibility to enforce the law. And I think we should be working to codify Roe v. Wade so that those protections are permanent and that women have reproductive rights. I'm a former educator, and I actually see education as the tip of the spear for the constitutional work that I do. And it's under attack again in Texas. And so we're going to protect our schools. We're going to protect them from frivolous suits about mask mandates during the pandemic. We're going to protect their curriculum and the TEA and ensure that local school boards maintain control over their curriculum. And that rounds out the tip of our platform.
Oh, that's great. So as a constitutional lawyer, you have an insightful perspective on many things that are happening across the state of Texas. What do you think is the most concerning thing that is happening right now today?
Yeah, unfortunately, Texas is so embroidered in controversy that By the time someone rewatches this, there's going to be some major controversy.
Exactly.
If you would allow me, I know you said the most important thing. I'll go with the top three.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Protecting the voter rights is so important because that's where citizens are busy providing for their families, and in order to do that, they elect people that they trust to take care of the governance things, the things that make their lives easier, the things that we expect to come from government. And until citizens have the right to vote and their full citizen rights protected, then their everyday lives become handicapped. So voting rights, as we discussed earlier, is around one of the most important things. There is, in fact, a crisis going on at the border. I know that it's not necessarily popular in the Democratic circles to acknowledge the crisis,
Okay.
but there's a humanitarian crisis occurring at our borders. We have international commitments to ensure a fair asylum seeking process, and we know that periodically, each year, there are large groups that come to our border seeking asylum, and that has been accelerated recently because of both the pandemic and the consequences to the world economy. A lot of people are being drawn to America. We have a responsibility to get the proper resources to our border communities, listen to our border communities about what they need. And what they're telling us is they need translators, judges, interpreters, social workers in order to meet the human rights crisis there. And of course, women's rights. Women's rights in Texas is at a is under unique attack, as we sort of touched on before. And the legislation coming out of the 87th legislature and just out of Austin in general seems to have complete disregard for the rule of law. Women are full and equal citizens. Roe v. Wade established that. It's been the law of the land for 40 years, and there's been a direct assault on that. I think it's important that we protect our women in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all for that. I have a teenage daughter. I have to fight for her and her rights.
Absolutely.
I can't believe she was born, having a lot of rights and has lost them as she has grown older. How did this happen? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it just seems like we're going backwards. So let's talk about some specific policy issues. We were just talking about women's rights and abortion. So we are now currently waiting to hear what is going to happen at the U.S. Supreme Court over SB 8. They're also listening to the Mississippi case. What insight do you have on that right now? What do you think is going to happen with the Supreme Court? And what do you think about the law itself and all the lawsuits that are coming from it? Like, what is your gauge on what's happening on the ground with this issue?
I think ultimately the federal government will, in the Supreme Court's jurisprudence at least, will defeat SB 8. It is not uncommon for runaway legislators, as they're called, to pass heartbeat bills that are in direct contradiction to federal law. And we know federal law wins in the end. Texas tried something unique. Our attorney general bent over backwards to strip women of their rights in Texas by saying that they wouldn't be the enforcement wing. Our attorney general's office wouldn't be the enforcement wing of the heartbeat bill, but that anybody else could, anyone else in the world. And that's a unique strategy. We haven't seen that on the national level before. I'm afraid that might catch on. And so it's really important that we fight to end it here in Texas before other southern states begin to pick it up and it becomes a trend. But ultimately, these things are going to come to a head in June when the Supreme Court's hears a case out of Mississippi that will challenge Roe v. Wade on its face. And like I said, we want to continue to fight to codify Roe v. Wade so that it won't be subject to sort of whimsical legal challenges when people like Kim Paxton get creative.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what is your positioning on gun safety and gun sense?
I think it's unfortunate that in order to serve their base, the Republican Party has disregarded the facts on the ground. Right now, gun violence all across the country is on the rise. And we've had terrible tragedies in Texas. We have far too many terrible tragedies in Texas, in particular in our schools, right? And so I'm a gun owner. Over the years, I've learned to teach my kids about guns so that they are not, mesmerized by them. As I have a bunch of boys, and so they often are. So we talk about gun safety, gun storage. My kids can tell you about guns, what to do when around a gun. But we certainly should. I think it was a bad idea during this heightened time of gun violence to say in Texas, you no longer are required to get basic training on gun weapons. There's no real rules about gun storage and gun safety. And we're asking for a really volatile situation to get very much worse.
Oh, okay. Hold on just 1 second, guys.
No worries.
Okay.
Okay. So we're asking for a volatile situation concerning guns to get worse. I would reverse constitutional carry, or I would challenge it on legal grounds, just because it doesn't make sense in terms of making us all safer as Texas. I believe in the Second Amendment, and there's a purpose for it that I think, if we're honest, a well-ordered militia is not everybody without checks or balances having access to a gun. And most importantly, law enforcement has asked that constitutional carry not be allowed the way that it's being defined in Texas, because it makes their job more difficult. And law enforcement in Texas is already under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so law enforcement didn't want it. They went publicly saying that they didn't want this law to pass.
Yeah.
And yet, Governor Abbott, who says he supports law enforcement, went ahead and signed the bill.
That's right. He seems to support law enforcement in name only. So he says back the blue. But right now, and he also acknowledged that Texas is experiencing a mental health crisis, which is actually really important. 1 out of 5 Americans in general has suffered some sort of undiagnosed mental health crisis. And after the pandemic, we've seen a rapid acceleration of mental health deterioration, mental health crisis. And Governor Abbott acknowledged that in the State of the State. He said Texas is experiencing a spike in these numbers. And then he did nothing to resolve it. He threw the burden on law enforcement, who again told them that they don't have the training, they don't have the resources to deal with these calls. They are already overwhelmed. But, he can say back the blue, but his policies and Republican policy in general doesn't support actual law and order. It supports whatever is popular to their base at the time.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, well, anyways, we definitely have seen that increase in gun usage, increase in violence, increase in homicides. Yeah. It's definitely a problem. So one of the things that talking about guns and advocating for the police is that our group is definitely pro-police.
Absolutely.
Because, why wouldn't we be? Of course we are, they're a very important part of our community. One of the things that I don't really hear too much about is how we would do police reform in such a way where we do give police access to, some psychiatrists and psychologists that could be on their team and help them when they have those situations arise. Because when we think about, we don't want to, we want to expand the police force to include some of these specialists to empower our police force, right?
Yeah. So the question is are we going to back the blue in name only? Are we going to chant back the blue, or are we going to pursue policies that are good for law enforcement and increase community safety? And I think that that's what our campaign is offering. Our policies are geared around listening to law enforcement officers. And I appreciate that you pointed out, the other options available for law enforcement. So it's one thing to complain that law enforcement too often relies on the use of force, which quite frankly they do. But this is another thing to give them other tools. And so right now, the only training in response to the mental health crisis, for example, was 40 hours, what's called CIT, or critical incident training, which is completely insufficient. We need them to be with actual mental health professionals. There is a CAHOOTS program that Austin is exploring, as well as a Denver STAR program. Both the CAHOOTS and the CAHOOTS program is out of Oregon. And we've seen models where you have the first responders. Number one, we need mental health departments in Texas. Something that we just haven't explored at all. But if we have a mental health crisis, it's obvious that we need mental health departments. And once I'm in office, I'll be working on building an infrastructure and helping commissions provide resources for that. But in the meantime, we've seen these programs be highly successful. They're good for law enforcement. They're good for the community. And we want to see projects like that expand in Texas.
That's great. Okay, so going in a little bit of a slightly different direction. So, our group, our first word in our name is mothers.
That's right.
So, we are here to support other mothers and as well as just Texas families. And one of the things that came up in our group was child support and child support for single mothers.
Yeah.
And that is something that is managed out of the AG's office.
Yes, it is.
So give us some feedback on any changes that you would propose doing to those to that department, because a lot of moms are not getting their child support.
Right. Texas is among the last in the nation in terms of the ability to recover child support, and there's reasons for that. We rely far too heavily on our in-carceral system. In other words, if you don't pay your child support, then we're going to criminalize you and send you to jail. And look, that's intimidating for some fathers, but it doesn't help mom get any child support, right? And it hasn't proven to be an incentive. There's an opportunity there at the AG's office. It has a pulse on Texas families. And so as we are learning about these families and we have resource tentacles touching these families, why not provide job opportunities, job training, educational opportunities? Use the civil remedies a lot more in order to help recover finances. So instead of directly criminalizing someone, our civil courts have become experts at finding where the money is, right? In lien bank accounts, wage garnishments, et cetera, so that families can actually get the resources. Using our prisons that are already overcrowded and underfunded in and of themselves hurts families. It doesn't, in the process, doesn't get the outcome that we want, which is to make sure these children have support. Under my leadership, the Texas AG's office will have a family building unit that will be specifically designed at counseling, problem solving, therapy, whatever families need in order to either successfully co-parent or to recover the resources families need to be successful.
Yeah, that's great. So, so speaking of families, let's talk about mask mandates and vaccine mandates. What is your position on these?
I think it should be a local concern, right? So right now, the Texas Attorney General's office has begun suing school districts because they're making some tough decisions in the classroom about a pandemic that we don't fully understand. And every day it changes just a little bit. So today the conversation is about Omicron, but the Delta variant is still the deadliest, whether hospitalizations are going up, what's the impact on youth, et cetera. We don't know. And so school boards, my kids are in Frisco ISD in the elementary school, and they've gauged the community. They're paying attention to or in conversations with the county judge, and they're making decisions that are best for their communities. Now, normally that would be something the Republicans say, that's right, local control is the right thing. But again, because their base somehow is anti-mask, because Trump decided that he was anti-mask, then our students should suffer. I would end the frivolous lawsuits against our school districts. I would provide protection for our schools so that the school boards, the superintendents will have the control to make the decisions that they need to keep our children safe. In terms of vaccine mandates, the conversation is coming from whether or not federal entities should be able to require that their agents have use vaccines. And then can businesses say, well, we want our employees vaccinated in order for them to show up to work. Again, that is the responsibility of the warehouse of those entities. We've never been a government to come in and say, you're mandated to do what we say do. And that's what Governor Abbott and Mr. Paxton is pursuing in their policies. It's not that they're opposing vaccine mandates. They're mandating that individuals and businesses can't make those decisions on their own to keep their community safe. I will continue to fight for businesses to be able to choose on their own whether or not they require vaccines. So,
the Republican policy is all about, we want small government, but yet they're not behaving.
They used to be the party of small government.
And
the
now,
truth is that's not them anymore.
Yeah, it's not them anymore. So they're not allowed to own that tagline anymore.
Yeah, just like they're not allowed to, and honestly, own the tagline Back to Blue. They are not the traditional Republican Party anymore. And a lot of the values the Texans, in the middle have come to rely on to be Republican are in truth things that Democratic policies and progressive policies support.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. All right. So what is your position on legalizing marijuana?
I think that we should legalize marijuana in Texas. I think it's time. I feel like, and I've been listening to the 87th legislature, although no bill came out, there was substantive conversation about decriminalizing the drugs and finding a profit margin. That kind of scares me. As we get past this era of over criminalizing drugs, what many have called a 50-year war on drugs, we have to acknowledge the damage that is done to communities. Communities have been devastated by this war that we fight. And I say have been as if it was past tense, but communities remain devastated by this war on drugs. So as we transition away from it, we must institute policies designed to rebuild these communities that we destroyed over the last 50 years with violent and hostile drug policies. So it's not enough for us to invite the businessmen in to make money off of it and allow big tobacco to support. I need to benefit off of the legalization of cannabis in Texas, but we need to find a way for it to serve the communities that it's impacted.
That's great. So, and then along with legalizing marijuana, what is your position on the death penalty and executions?
I think the fact that we continue to execute people in Texas and around the country is one of the biggest human rights crises that we're facing. We're already the most incarcerated nation in world history. Our legal system has run afoul of basic human decency. The death penalty, although I can understand our desire for an eye for an eye, the way that it's implemented in American courts, who have been proven repeatedly by their own assessment to have racial bias impact outcomes, so that poor individuals are, of course, more likely to be put to death. People of color are more likely to be put to death, and it's expensive. Putting people to death is literally burning money because there are so many safeguards to ensure everyone has a due process. It literally costs us millions and millions of dollars to put one person to death. It's a waste of resources, and it's also inhumane.
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't very pro-life.
No, it's not pro-life.
It's not pro-life.
And for the outcomes that people look for, because a penalty that severe, so that ultimate, is designed to deter. And every study that has shown us is that where the death penalty is used more readily, there is no correlation where crime goes down or murder goes down. In fact, the opposite happens. People figure, well, this is Texas, and in Texas they put people to death, and so I might as well shoot it out, And the data tells us that it's ineffective in deterring crime.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's talk about education, because you were mentioning that you're really into education.
That's right.
So there's so much going on in
There's
education.
too much going on.
Too much going on. I mean, yeah. So let's talk. Where do we start? Boy, because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
So go right ahead and just tell me, what is your platform on education, and then I might ask you a couple of questions.
Sure thing. I have to say I'm an educator first. The reason I went to law school was because I didn't have enough tools to fight for the communities that I was serving as an educator or coach in my community. In fact, as a school teacher, rapid redevelopment in the area that I was teaching was causing displacement of families from their homes. And so I got into some fair housing issues with my students, and we protested and we spoke with the city council, and we got some attention on the issue. But as soon as the cameras went away, they went forward with the rapid redevelopment, and a lot of communities were impacted and displaced. And that's when I went back to law school to say, I want to learn about fair housing. I want to learn about how to serve our schools best. On the other end of that, after going to law school, starting my constitutional practice, and coming back to see how I could best serve the schools. Here in Texas, I actually worked first for Dallas ISD as a recruiter, trying to get educators to schools. Our schools are in duress. Our schools are underfunded. We're having a very difficult time finding the appropriate staffing and teachers and educators to get to our schools. And instead of helping, the most important thing that I think that we do as a state, is 1 in 10 people are educated here in Texas. 1 in 10 children are educated here in Texas. And they say, as Texas goes, the country goes. The reason they say that is because Texas is so big and so far west that most publishers gear their material to whatever Texans want. So what they're learning New York and Massachusetts and Ohio actually starts in Texas. So it's a huge responsibility for us Texans. And right now, our schools have become a political battlefield. I'm embarrassed to see the kind of lawsuits the Attorney General is pursuing against school districts, the kind of rhetoric coming out of the office. He's almost mocking them, saying, we know that you have limited resources, and we will make you spend your last penny fighting litigation against your own state. It's tragic, really. And I think we have a responsibility to get in there and protect our schools.
I mean, that doesn't even seem like well, first of all, it's not fair, but it doesn't even seem like even that should be legal.
It shouldn't be.
It's
yeah,
so absurd
yeah.
that this is what's going on. So along with education, let's talk about, a lot of things that are pretty hot right now is the banning of books right now in the schools, which is
Banning books is hot.
yeah.
I mean, it really feels like we're living in a time machine. If someone told me that one of the major issues of this attorney general's race is their ability to ban books,
Right.
I would say
You're crazy.
How is that possible?
No.
But that's exactly it. That the Republicans have decided, and I like to call it a CRT scam. They've decided that there's an issue with CRT that is not in fact an issue. That the TEA, the Texas Education Association, that our school boards haven't identified it as an issue. The issue came from politicians in Austin because they found that their base reacts well when you try these, really it's racial dog whistles about what our students learn and protecting whiteness in Texas. It's a shame, and I think we need to do everything that we can to oppose and keep politics out of our schools, except for maybe doing a better job teaching about civics.
Yeah. So what do we do right now to combat a lot of this stuff that is happening right now in school boards? Like, what do we do to help school districts like South Lake?
So the idea is that we should be deferring to local control. Right now, we need to be letting the Attorney General know that we don't support the kind of lawsuits, the way our tax dollars are being spent. Unfortunately, one of the best ways that we can let him know that he does not have his support is simply voting him out. I say unfortunately because we have to wait till November 22 to do that. So it's not as immediate as we have what we want, but our schools are going to continue to be in danger as long as Ken Paxton is in office, because he doesn't care about the outcomes that we as a community are looking for. He's demonstrated over and over again he's only concerned about the outcomes that he's looking for, which is pleasing his base. So whether it's good for his base or not, or good for all Texans, that's not his concern. And so we have to vote him out. In addition to that, we should be empowering our school boards. We should be participating in our school boards. On a local level, Republican strategy has become very, very micro, right? They're influencing local governments. They're showing up to school board meetings, and they're forcing the CRT scan onto jurisdictions. We need to get in there and interrupt that. We need to get involved on a local level. And when I say we, I mean the Texas Attorney General's office. When you try to unfairly influence education in a way that marginalizes students of color, that's a 14th Amendment violation. The people's lawyer has a responsibility to come in and say, no, I'm going to protect our schools from this kind of interference. We don't expect that from Paxton, but it's something we plan to deliver.
One of the worrisome things was that, for example, like South Lake is a school district where the CRT folks took over the school board.
Yeah.
So what do the rest of, what does everybody else do when the school board is controlled by these extreme groups?
Right. So these extremist groups are pursuing policies that marginalize protected people, or what I say, protected classes of people, marginalized women, marginalized people of color. So even the minority groups in places like South Lake, who are impacted but are not in control, should be able to appeal to the Texas Attorney General's office for protection of their civil liberties, right? What they would historically do is a report to the Civil Rights Division. And so what did Ken Paxton do as soon as he got in office? He actually closed the Civil Rights Division. And so we're going to reopen the Civil Rights Division once we're in office. It's so that those communities, and it's really important because that's what the law is designed for marginalized communities who may not have the voice of the masses, but have the basic protections of Americans, right? The basic protections of citizens. They should be able to appeal to the Constitution and to the constitutional enforcer in Texas, which is the AG's office, to ensure things like the CRT scan does not affect their ability to have access to a robust education.
Yeah, that's excellent. So let's talk about teachers, because one of the things that upsets me the most is that, first of all, I love teachers and I love librarians and I love books. And one of the things that upsets me on a daily basis is how poorly they're being treated, not necessarily always by their school districts, but by the legislation that comes down from the governor's office on down and from the TEA. For example, in Austin AISD, here in Austin, it's where my kids go, a school teacher is only allowed to have 3 sick days. And then after that, like, so if they get COVID and they're home for 10 to 14 days, they're going to have to pay for a substitute for the other subsequent days.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the rulings and legislations come down from Abbott during COVID has been sort of like, hey, we all love our teachers. There are essential workers. Let's treat them terrible.
Right.
You know, this got to end. So how would you support teachers in the classroom?
Well, again, it's a part of the Republican agenda hypocrisy. They say we support teachers, but at the same time, Governor Abbott in particular has flipped the funding in the school so that the state is no longer responsible for paying their fair share.
Yeah.
They used to cover about 60% of the budget, and locally they would raise about 30%. And now that's been flipped. I would work to improve the way that we fund our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked in this area actually for a while now as a constitutional attorney. The way we fund our schools is relying most heavily on property taxes, which is a major issue in Texas. It's probably more pronounced here in Texas because we pay some of the highest property taxes in the country. The third, we pay of all the states, we're number 3 in terms of who pays the highest property taxes. But our school systems rely almost entirely on property taxes. So we have the benefit to say that we don't have an income tax in Texas. Well, we need to find another way to get funding into our schools, and the way is obvious. Texas is the 9th largest economy. We're attracting all kinds of businesses and corporations and headquarters here. Mm-hmm. That's great. The reason we're attracting them here is because we offer incentives. We have to ensure that these corporations are paying their fair share, particularly to the communities that they find themselves in, but also just into the things that we care about as Texans. And we have a responsibility as the Attorney General to negotiate contracts with that in mind, to set up funding systems when businesses come here, to not incentivize them and pass on the cost to workers, but to ensure that they continue to pay their fair share.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Texas is rated like #1 in the country for business, and that's great. And that's something that Governor Abbott talks a lot about.
But what about people?
But what about people? What about families? I mean, our ROI, which is return on investment. That's what it means. For everybody who doesn't know. So the ROI for families it's not there. Mm-hmm. So we're investing and we're paying our taxes and we're supporting companies coming in Texas. But what about us?
Yeah, we're supposed to celebrate the wealth of corporations.
Yeah.
Well, Texas seems to be doing really well. A lot of money is coming. A lot of corporations are coming. Mm-hmm. But when all the costs and consequences are passed on to the workers, then you have a caste system, and that's exactly what the Republicans are supporting. Mm-hmm. A caste system where the rich get all the benefits and the workers have to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some things that are very concerning. So now you have said that Texas is in the front and center of an attack on our democracy. What do you mean by this, and how important are the 2022 elections?
The 2022 elections are critical, and there's a reason that you'll find that Trump is paying particular attention to Texas. I've appreciated that some of the national conversation has been around the importance of Texas in setting trends throughout the country. And so as we saw voter rights being attacked in Texas, you saw a domino effect all across the South, where people said, well, we can pass voter suppression legislation similar to Texas. Texas has always been known to be bold, and the Republicans in office have been bold in their constitutional violations. They have been bold in their desire they literally made 4 million votes of color disappear from the last 10 years. And so Texas is going to remain on center stage in this fight, and we have to win.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our motto is "in it to win it," or maybe that mostly my motto, but I'm going to make it everybody else's motto.
Not an option.
Yes, we're in it to win it. So, so if you're the nominee, if you're the nominee and you decide to run, how are you going to work with other people down the ballot to kind of help them rise up as well? So we're in it to win it.
Well, that's one of the great benefits of our campaign. We announced in July, and it's on the day that we announced, we had about $200,000 contributed in small dollar donations from over 10,000 people. From from all 50 states. In other words, we are attracting a base who have been paying attention to the work that we've been doing for the past decade. We've been well centered in the national discussion on racial reconciliation and dealing with criminal justice reform. And we've been a part of that conversation that has allowed us to elevate sort of our status, our platform as a firm. And so we want, as we begin to take on Texas, we want to plug in those communities that we know that Texas, although it's often seen as a red state, it's not so much a red state as a non-voting state.
Yes.
That if the people who stayed home came out, then Texas would be very blue. And so what our goal is to bring out those unlikely voters. It's a base of voters that we already have. We've established a relationship with through our practice over the past few years. We want to see if we can marry those two communities, bringing out the Black and brown voters who are impacted by the issues that we have attacked, but understanding that, you know, we fight on behalf of schools, we fight on behalf of women's rights, the constitutional community, ACLU, these civil liberties groups have really captured the nation's attention in the last year and a half. We can use that power, that energy to flip Texas, and that's what we plan to do in this upcoming election year.
Yeah. So in my neighborhood, in Austin, but in other neighborhoods across Texas, we've seen a rise of a lot of anti-Semitism and some hate going on. So what would your position be on, you know, creating some support so we can fight some of the things that we're seeing on the ground and feeling on the ground?
Absolutely. So there's two things that we need to do primarily. The first we talked about is which bring back the Civil Rights Division, so that there's a place that communities who are under attack can go to and receive the support of their government. But we also need to open up lines of communication between the AG's office, that's often seen as an ivory tower off somewhere else, and the community. I've been paying attention to the community liaison groups created by Attorney General Keith Ellison in Minnesota, and how he's worked with communities to transform literally the AG's office into the people's firm. That's the tack that we're going to take here in Texas.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's really interesting. Okay. The next one is now, if you are not the nominee, how will you use your political experience to help the Democratic nominee win Attorney General?
The Texas Attorney General's office impacts virtually every aspect of Texas life.
Yeah.
The things that I care about, my kids' education, my home, my property taxes, my ability to grow my family. It's so important that we must win that office. So no matter who's the nominee, I will be using all the resources available at my discretion to bring out those unlikely voters, people that my platform has allowed me to impact over the years. I will continue to try to build up coalitions with the groups that I've worked with, like Texas Organizing Project, like the Grassroots Law Project that I helped co-found, and using those organizations to bring out the vote. What happened in Georgia flipping, it just didn't happen overnight. It was years and years of community organizations working together until they got to the point. I've been working with community organizers in Texas for years. We're right there at the tipping point. We went from a large gap between our ability to win statewide. We narrowed it down to less than 4% of the vote. And we're right there on the tipping edge. And I'm going to do whatever I can, no matter who's the nominee, to push us over the edge.
That's great. So where are the opportunities right now, and what should we be doing? So we're Mothers Against Greg Abbott with 27,000 followers. Where should our 27,000 followers be putting their time in to start tipping this vote? Because we need to work. We all need to work. Everybody needs to do their thing.
That's right. We need every one of those 27,000 members to back Merritt for Texas. I think that's the best way for us to begin to win statewide. And I say that kiddingly, but also this is the most vulnerable office and probably one of the most influential. Once we win the Texas Attorney General's office, we don't have to worry about whether or not we have enough votes to pass the legislation or pursue the agenda that we have. It's an executive office. We can start working from day one. We want someone in that office who has sort of on the ground training, who's ready to go from day one.
Yeah.
If you take my office, the work that we've done over the past decades around the country and in Texas, which is a relatively small office. It's a national practice, but it's not the size of the Texas Attorney General's office, with 350 attorneys, 4,000 employees in that $1.26 billion budget I was telling you about. So you can take the work that I've been doing protecting Texas and amplify it on day one, because that's exactly what we're promising to do as the Texas Attorney General. I think that in terms of the things that you and I have talked about, from power grid to property taxes to mothers' rights to our schools, that's where all Texans should be focusing their energy and capturing that office for the people. I think our campaign is the one to do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So I don't know, hold on, let me ask our assistants, are there any questions? Are we good? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was so great to meet
Pleasure to
you.
see you.
And I hope to see you on the campaign trail.
Yeah.